All right, let's jump right into one of the deepest, most fascinating mysteries of the mind. We're going to talk about the relationship between an experience, like seeing a color or feeling happy, and the one who's actually having that experience.
So, let's start with a really simple question. When you look at something blue, an experience is definitely happening. But it's not just happening in some empty void, right? It's happening to you. So, what exactly is that you? Who or what is doing the seeing? To even start to get a handle on a question that big, we need a framework. We need a way to talk about this really fundamental part of being conscious. And, philosophers have been wrestling with this for a long time, so of course they have a name for it.
And that name is self-perspectable organization. Okay, I know, it sounds super academic, but stick with me, because the core idea is actually pretty simple. It just means that conscious experiences, your thoughts, feelings, sensations, they don't just float around on their own. They are always states of a conscious self. They are states of you.
Yeah, think of it this way. Experiences aren't like these little separate atoms of thought just bouncing around in a vacuum. They're fundamentally attached to and organized by an experiencer. I mean, you can't have a feeling of pain without a self that is in pain. So to really get this, let's break down this whole self-perspectival organizationing thing into its three key characteristics. This is really going to help us see how the self works as the anchor for our entire conscious life.
Okay, first up, the existence of a subject. Super straightforward. Any experience is always had by someone. Second, this connection is what we call an essential organization. It's not just an accident. The experience is inherently, fundamentally tied to an experiencer. And third, the self acts as the perspectival point. It's the here, the center point from which you see the world and from which it all makes sense.
There's this quote that just illustrates it perfectly. I mean, can you imagine a wave without an ocean? No way, right? A wave is just something the ocean does. Well, in the very same way, an experience is something a self has. It's such a powerful way to make a really abstract idea feel totally real.
Now you might be sitting there thinking, okay, this all sounds kind of obvious. But believe it or not, this very idea has kicked off centuries of intense philosophical debate. Is this self a real, actual thing, or is it something else entirely?
So, in one corner, you've got skeptics like the philosopher David Hume. He famously argued that when he looked inward, all he could ever find were individual thoughts and feelings, but never a single constant self. But then in the other corner, you have thinkers like René Descartes who basically said, come on, this is self-evident. Experiences have to exist as states of a thinking subject.
And this conversation has just kept going and evolving. After Hume shook things up, Immanuel Kant came along with a truly game-changing idea. Fast forward a couple centuries, and you have philosophers like Searle reaffirming that classical view. And today, today some modern thinkers are even suggesting the self might be more of a virtual construct. Let's just focus on Kant's idea for a second because it's just so important. He argued that the little phrase "I think" must be able to accompany all of our experiences. Now, this doesn't mean you're constantly thinking, I am seeing this or I am hearing that. But the sheer possibility of that self-awareness, Kant argued that's the unifying thread that stitches all our separate perceptions together into one single experience. So how does this all fit together? Well, this whole concept of a self-perspective isn't just some weird, isolated idea. It's actually a foundational piece, a cornerstone for understanding the very structure of consciousness itself. This self-organization is a huge part of the mind's overall architecture. It's the framework that organizes how you experience time, space, and even your own body. It's also deeply tied to the concept of unity. The very reason that the sound of my voice and the words you see on screen feel like they're happening to the same person, to you, is because of this unifying self-perspective.
And what all this points to is this really fascinating feedback loop between the self and the world. The self is the perspective that organizes your experience of the world, but at the same time, your experiences in the world are constantly shaping and changing who you are.
So, okay, after all that philosophy, what does this actually mean for you? For that internal universe you're living in every single moment of every single day? It means your consciousness is not just a chaotic flood of random data pouring in from your senses. It is an organized, unified perspective. And that perspective, that central point of view that ties everything together into a coherent story, well, that is you. And that leaves us with one last, really provocative question to think about.
If your self is the perspective through which you experience reality, what happens when that perspective changes? And what does that tell us about who we really are?